Live from London, this is the Sunday Morning Breakfast Show with Sobia Iqbal on Teachers Talk Radio.
Good morning. You're listening to Sobia Stellar Sunday. It's Sunday the 13th of June. We have the best conversations coming your way. What is included in classical education? Should it be taught in state schools? And what's it like to be a global certified Google educator and innovator? It's another thrilling morning. Prepare for takeoff.
Live from London, this is the Sunday Morning Breakfast Show with Sobia Iqbal on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Welcome. If you're a first-time listener, it's a great show today. My first guest is Jasmine Elmer. Jasmine and I both attended Walthamstow School for Girls. It was a comprehensive state school in East London, and it was good enough to rival a grammar or a private school. Jasmine studied ancient world studies and then went on to Cambridge to complete her PGCE in classics. She has spent around 15 years in a variety of schools across a wide range of ages. She then completed her master's in classics and ancient history. She works for Classics for All, who are trying to bring classical subjects into state schools around the country. Jasmine is also involved in the governance of the Classical Association as one of their Equality, Diversity and Inclusion officers. We're going to come back to Jasmine in just a moment. Jasmine, if you just hold on for one moment. Hello, welcome to the show. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. So early on a Sunday morning. I think 9 a.m. is quite early for a lot of people on a Sunday.
Yeah, it is quite early. So I'm really pleased that you're here.
Great.
Jasmine and I actually went to Walthamstow School for Girls. So it was quite interesting when I asked her to come onto the show because it's been quite a while that we've not seen each other. But we've got good memories of the school, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. I mean, it was a great school when we were there. I don't know about it now. I'm sure it's still fantastic. And we had so much fun there, and we just really enjoyed all of the teachers, the facilities, and obviously each other. Great place.
Yeah, and we were both slightly nervous today, and we both said that they did raise us to be very strong, confident women, and that they instilled that in us, and they always told us not to neglect the gift that is in thee. So that's what we're going to do today.
Correct. I think if any of our teachers are listening, they're going to be very happy with that that's still in us all these years later.
Right. Okay, Jasmine, can you explain your journey leading up to now for our listeners?
Sure. I mean, you gave a really good kind of bio at the beginning, but, you know, same school, same sort of background, you know, East London upbringing, liked school, did okay at school. I hope, again, if any of my teachers listening, don't call in and you know, subvert that. But, and then I did my A-levels at George Monarch's College in biology, geography and history, which is probably quite a strange combination if you go on and do classics. And then I did ancient world studies at UCL. So I did that from scratch. I turned up day one, Sobia, nothing, no knowledge whatsoever, which is quite a bold move. And probably I'll blame the school again for that, for making me think I can just do absolutely anything. And then decided to turn my hand to teaching, as you said, PGCE in classics at Cambridge. And then teaching in schools. I mean, I've actually taught internationally as well, taught classics in New Zealand.
Wow.
And a number of schools, state and mainly private, because that's something we'll talk about probably a bit later on, where the subject perhaps has its stronghold. And then did a master's in ancient history and classics recently, a few years ago, at Exeter University. And now I work for Classics for All. So, you know, I've got a lot of, at this stage of my career, quite a lot of experiences, quite diverse, which has really helped me in my current role and also talking to you today.
And that's really interesting, Jasmine, because we went to a normal comprehensive state school and we didn't have Latin or any classical subjects in our school. So where did the interest originate from? Because it certainly wasn't at WSFG.
No, and that's what makes me laugh, because you'll remember, and anyone else who went to the school, we had a Greek theatre randomly.
Yes, we did.
And I'm really confused because we never studied one tiny little bit of classics, yet we had this Greek theatre, which I think we all just used for gossiping and eating sandwiches. But
strawberries and cream.
Okay. Oh, okay. I missed that. No, so, you know, where did it come from is quite a hard question for me, because I think it was instilled in me by my mother, who was not university educated either, but just loved the ancient world. So stories when I was young. I did a trip to Pompeii when I was 15. And I think, you know, I was always a humanities girl. I adored my history. Mrs. McElroy, if you're listening, you instilled that in me totally. And
she certainly did.
She was a fantastic teacher. And so I think historical things were my bag. And then I really wanted to understand why, when we look at history, I wanted to look at the origins of civilizations. And that's why my degree was actually quite wide in the ancient world in general, not just classical worlds, which I think, you know, we can talk about a little bit later what the difference is. So I just loved it. I think I loved it from a young age, but it was a whole mishmash, if you like, of influences that got me into it eventually, and maybe sign up for a degree in it.
So can you just go through what the purpose of Classics for All is, and why do you think it's important to study classics?
So, you know, Classics for All has been around for 10 years now, and we work in schools across the country. We have 17 regional hubs, and we have worked with over 500 primary schools and 500 secondary schools. And what we do is we train non-specialist teachers, so you don't have to have any background in classics whatsoever. We use our expertise and a number of courses that we use that are fully prepared, if you like, ready to go. And we train our teachers to implement these subjects. And we do that sort of on an ongoing basis. We have long-standing relationships with schools to help them have the confidence, the knowledge to bring what we believe is a really important subject to pupils across the country. So that's really what we do. And then, you know, why is it important to study classics? And this is a great question. I mean, classicists get asked this all the time. I think this is probably 20 years of being asked this question. I would say it's easier to start with, why would you study any humanities subject? Why do you study any linguistic subject? It's the same for classics. It might feel like it's its own small little bubble, but in fact, the arguments are the same. You know, you study history to better understand today's society. You study history to develop a whole load of skills that you might need to use, like critical thinking, analysis. You know, why do you study a language? Well, for similar reasons. You kind of stimulate the critical mind, but as well as learning the roots of words in your own language. Or so really what we're talking about is it's such a wide subject, Sobia, that you can kind of get almost anything you want out of classics. So this is why it's really important for people to understand what it is and what it encompasses.
And I'm going to go through that in just a moment. But
Sure.
What I wanted to know was, obviously, you're trying to bring classics into state schools. Has there been much interest within state schools, and do students enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, in short, yes and yes. I mean, we have lots of it. I mean, Classics for wouldn't exist for 10 years and we wouldn't be getting so busy and having so many people involved and get so many inquiries if it wasn't doing well in state schools. You know, that we've got, like I said, now 1,000 schools across the country doing the subject. So I think that's proof is in the pudding. That's what the statistics say. Do students enjoy it? Absolutely. I mean, it is such a varied subject that there is always something for everyone in it. You know, if you're not biggest fan of languages, well, that's one little branch of it. You can ignore that if you like. You can do the history and the cultural side of things, or if you are a linguist, you can delve into that side of it. So students really enjoy it. And I think the really good thing about it is, you know, classics teachers have really kind of changed the way they teach the subject over the last few decades to ensure that it's, you know, engaging and innovative and for all students.
And so for those people who don't know anything about classics, because I have a lot of listeners who are parents who actually listen in, can you tell us what subjects are included? And can you just go through briefly each of these subjects?
Of course, yeah. So classics is like an umbrella term for a number of sort of subjects underneath that. So you can study it broadly or you can delve into just one of these particular areas. So the ones that are well known might be the languages, Latin and Greek. So you can study them exclusively or together. There's ancient history, so very similar to just doing a history degree, but you specialise in ancient history instead of, you know, more modern history that we might have studied at school. And then you have subjects like archaeological subjects, so, you know, you're dealing with a much more sort of scientific basis and looking at artifacts, looking at the material remains of Greeks and Romans to understand the world. So you can see what I mean. Someone like me, for example, has done all of those things. So I took a very broad approach in classics because I like doing that. But you'll find other people that just go down one of those roads, and that's also fine.
Okay, so what impact does studying classics have, and why should it be on the school curriculum, do you think?
Well, I mean, again, it depends what route we're going down. There's a number of different arguments here. So, like, if you go down the languages route for a second, I mean, Latin and Greek words make up the basis for about 50% of English. So it's like a quick route almost to improving your ability with English vocabulary and indeed grammar to understand Latin and Greek words. So it can also therefore be the basis for learning modern foreign languages, the Romance languages that have come through today from their Latinate origins. So that's one thing that's really good about it. If you learn the ancient world, Sobia, you'll learn. It's the same again, like I keep saying, about if you want to learn history. If you really want to understand your society, why Western, particularly society, is as it is, why it's organized in such a way, why people are sometimes the way they are, then you study classics. You study the origins of civilizations in Europe, in the West, to better highlight that and understand its journey, trace it through from its origins to today. And I certainly can say for myself that as a historian first, that went into the ancient world, I think I've got a really nice understanding of things. And actually, in a mad, crazy world that we live, I think it can provide a bit of anchorage to understanding society today.
Okay, so Jasmine, there was an article in the Times and the headline said studying classics gives teens the Homer advantage. And basically it was explaining that there was a government advisor, Baroness Greenfield, who says that children should study Latin and Greek until they're 16. And she went on to explain that studying classics was hugely beneficial to the development of young brains. And she's a neuroscientist as well. So she said it was very good for your prefrontal cortex because you're working through a sentence that can go on for half a page, for example.
Yeah, sure.
And then she described Homer's Odyssey, and she was saying that it's much more interesting for children to learn about the gods and goddesses than a video game, which obviously it comes down to interest. It comes down to interest. But that's what she was saying. And she also said that, similar to what you've just said, that it helps you wrestle with big ideas such as how we're best governed and what do people want out of society. However, Jasmine, there's a massive divide here, isn't it, between those people who say we should study classics versus those who say we shouldn't? Because as you've said, some people are saying it's very good for understanding the English language, in particular grammar and vocabulary, and also it helps with academic achievement in other subjects, not just languages. But then you've got other people who say that there's, it's negatively associated with class, it's elitist, and it's also a dead language, and that we're better off studying Mandarin. So what are your thoughts and opinions on that?
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I understand all those views, and I know why they're there, and I come across them quite regularly, of course. I think I've sort of made some of the general points that I would kind of reiterate here, but also, to me, it's this idea that we need to understand really why classics are seen as elitist. This is all to do with the history of the subject, not the subject itself. The subject itself is just the lives, the languages of the Greeks and Romans. Okay, so if we separate that out a little bit and try and ignore the fact that, just put it aside, don't ignore, but for a second, that is elitist in its view. It isn't really in the kind of subject matter that we're dealing with. It's mostly in its history. So what I would say to that is that, if classical subjects are elitist, then I shouldn't exist. I shouldn't exist in my role. People like I shouldn't exist, because actually these are subjects that are absolutely and utterly relevant to all people. If you are a person, this is really a story of people, the mythology of people, the history of people, the language of people. That to me is extremely relevant and extremely important in today's society. And it isn't elitist. When we talk about this notion of a dead language, okay, I understand that classicists sort of hate that. They sort of freak out at that term, dead, because it's not a very nice term. But I know why that's there, and I understand that. It's not a spoken language. However, it is the root to so many spoken languages today. It's extremely regular. So a lot of people that study Latin and Greek find themselves actually quite safe and happy because it follows nice logical patterns. And so by learning those, you have the footing and the understanding of a number of languages, including our own. And I'll be honest, Sobia, my knowledge, again, I don't mean to disrespect the hard work of my English teachers at school. However, you know, my understanding of English vocabulary, grammar has all improved drastically through the study of classics. And that is what we see in the schools that we're working with in Classics for All. This is not kind of anecdotal. This is happening in real time right now. So my answer to this in short, you know, I could go on for hours. I know you want to hurry me along because there's other things to talk about. But, you know, my point is that, you know, we don't want them to be elitist. They shouldn't be elitist. They aren't actually in the very fibre of what they are elitist. It's really how the subject, I guess, has been kind of domineered by, you know, private school institutions over recent history that's made it seem that way. So my challenge, just in short, quickly, my challenge is to ask people to keep an open mind and just go and experience the subject, go to the actual raw subject for a little bit and see for yourself what it can do for you. And I promise you, you won't be disappointed.
Okay, and again, I'm going to bring in something that I read. So when I was doing my research, I came across an article from The Guardian by journalist Josephine Quinn. And she also argued that it was a privileged subject. And she said that there was a spokesperson from Camden School for Girls who said that the achievements of Greeks and Romans have had an enormous influence on nearly every aspect of our own culture. And she claimed that that was dubious. And she said that culture has started from Germanic and Celtic roots and that religions came from the Middle East. And she also said that we don't even use their political institutions here. So she argued whether we should be looking into Arabic or Chinese cultures instead. And then she also said that the Greeks and Romans were imperialistic, misogynistic and elitist. And I thought that was quite harsh, but what do you think?
Yeah, that is quite harsh. But my point is, just because something makes you uncomfortable does that mean you ignore it? You know, look at all the social movements that are going on today. Lots of those are very uncomfortable issues. Do we just go, oh, forget that then, that's too difficult? No. And we're not arguing in classics to devalue other subjects. I'm not suggesting that we take away things like Mandarin or understanding Middle Eastern cultures. You know, myself, I'm mixed race. You know, I'm half Pakistani. For me, those cultures are extremely important. I'm not talking about denying them. We're not replacing them with classics. We're asking for like a holistic view of it. And there are bits of classics that can feel uncomfortable to us today. And it's not that I would refute what that person said. I can't remember her name. Is it her? Sorry, I can't remember.
Josephine, yes. Josephine Quinn.
Thank you, Josephine Quinn. I'm not refuting what Josephine is saying. I'm suggesting that what do we do then? What do we do with that information? Do we just ignore it because it's uncomfortable? I think our students love that it's sometimes a bit difficult and uncomfortable. It encourages debate. And again, it's a reflection of today. There are elements of Greco-Roman society that are very patriarchal, difficult, you know, for example, in the role of women in society. Oh, so then we'll just ignore it, shall we? Because it makes us uncomfortable. It's not the right argument. I think what we should be doing is teaching our children a nice holistic view of all cultures. And we are in Europe, and the Greek and the Greco-Roman cultures, classical cultures, have had a direct influence on our societies today, even if there are additional influences as well.
Thank you. We've had a few comments come in. Alka said it's really nice to hear the classics being discussed. I guess that they don't get a lot of time and publicity. Yeah. And Alison has messaged in saying, can you recommend some text for children in Key Stage 2 as it's not on her son's school curriculum and she wants to enrich his reading from home? Oh, brilliant. Yeah, wonderful. I mean, so Key Stage, I'll at the end, perhaps I'll direct you to a website, but our Classics for All website has a number of useful links and resources to websites that you can get all sorts of things from mythology to languages. So I encourage you to look at that. And there is also another website, Primary Latin Project, that you can go on, where you'll see a whole range of resources that are suitable for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So in terms of books are always a bit of a difficult thing, because actually this is an area that we're working on in classics to improve the resources that we have available for young students in primary level. I read any kind of Greek mythology that I can find for my son as a bedtime story. It doesn't really matter necessarily what book I use, but just reading some of those stories and actually encouraging
discussion about it. You know, kind of what is this about? What is this myth about? So, you know, I'd look to those books, and depending on the age of your child, obviously, if you look at even books like Harry Potter, they all have lots of classical references in them, and much of the ideas are based on mythology. So that's what I would suggest. And if you want something a bit more concrete and educational in its basis, then I would look on the website, encourage you to look on those websites and find something.
And then, Jasmine, I'm just going to move over to the benefits of studying classics. So I've got here that it lifts academic outcomes. So when you're learning more than one language, it helps academically in other subjects. So it helps with your verbal, analytical, and problem-solving skills are stretched. And it also did say that there was a research project in the US where there were about 4,000 students in year 5, 6, and 7, and they were regularly studying Latin for 15, 20 minutes a day every single year. And then compared to learning French, Spanish, and German, that Latin group surpassed every other group and outperformed their learning and academic achievement. So research supports the claim that Latin helps with vocabulary comprehension and reading development for English speakers. And it also helps make an impact on SEN pupils. What's the background behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, because as I explained before, because, you know, Latin, and then I'll put in brackets Greek, because Latin is the focus, because the alphabet's the same as English and a lot of the Romance languages. So we focus on that because when you learn Latin as a language, there's a few things you get from it directly. So first of all, the etymology of words, the origin of words. And if you imagine, if you learn a few Latin words, those words can appear in various forms in either English, French, Italian. So it's kind of like a quick way to access those languages. I myself, for example, have never studied Italian, but if I pick up an Italian newspaper, I can read a number of the words and get the gist of it just using Latin. So it's actually, you know, it being the mother root for that. And, you know, as I said earlier on, about 50% of our words in English have Latinate origins. So when you learn, again, a few Latin words, you access a wider range of English vocabulary by doing that. So that's really important. And I think, you know, the other side of it is when you're learning the grammar, because the grammar of Latin is extremely regular, you learn the rule, that's the rule, you live your life. There are irregularities, but they're quite few and far between. So it also is quite a safe space to learn a language. If you think about, you learn English with no background of English, it's a horror, isn't it? Because it's just such a mishmash. The rules are confusing. There are all these exceptions, whereas Latin doesn't do that. And so I think for anyone studying any kind of language, it becomes this kind of, sometimes it can feel like a haven. I've heard it described as a haven for individuals that struggle with language, because it's neat and tidy and it follows rules. So you can see that already instills skills as well as knowledge in individuals, so analytical skills. The way the language works, you know, I won't go into too much detail about it and do a Latin lesson for everyone, but essentially you are doing a great deal of analysis in the in the grammar of something. So you learn how to be extremely analytical, critical, and that is so helpful in life in general as well. So that I think the combination of those things make it a really wonderful kind of way to improve vocabulary comprehension and reading development for English speakers.
Okay, Vivian, if you could just, Viveranda, can you just call in again, please? Because it cuts off really quickly, and so I'm not able to take your call. So if you would like to call in, please do call in again and hold on the line. Just another thing, Jasmine, just to go on to the strengthening literacy skills in English, you know, you've just said that it helps with basic grammar and syntax, and it also builds vocabulary, because for those listeners at home who don't know, most of our words come from Latin root words, and it assists children to decodify the English language. Sorry, if you just hold on 1 minute, because... Right, okay. And that basically means that a single Latin root can generate over 100 words, which means that if you've got 10 root words, it could give a child more than 1,000 words that they can decrypt on their own. And that means that students, when they're learning, they can gain meaning from unfamiliar words, and it helps with their comprehension as well as grasp another language. Yeah, but it's not just literacy, because they say that learning Latin also helps increase math scores because of the logic, the attention to systems, everyone's detail and thinking in an orderly manner, which is what you've just said.
Yes.
So I find it fascinating that, it was taken off the curriculum. A lot of other people about benefits have said that there are similarities with the modern world, because one of his students compared the Athenian demagogues of the late 5th century BC with populism in the USA. So it gives people thinking space to develop ideas. And he also said that it's a difference from the Mao-Pao style, literature that you normally get. And he said that there's lots of powerful women in there as well. So for example, Olympia, when she convinces her son Alexander the Great, was really a god. So there's lots of different things in there.
I mean, absolutely. And I'm trying to be general here, but these examples are really helpful. So there are a number of really important women. Although I talked about the difficulty of the role of women in history, there are a number of key figures in Greek and Roman history, such as Agrippina, the mother of Nero, the Emperor Nero, who appeared on coinage with Nero as that important, and certainly was the puppeteer behind a lot of the decisions that Nero made. So there are loads of women, and not just in the historical side, but in the literary side. We have Penelope in the Odyssey, and there are a number of really interesting figures in the Odyssey as well, like Circe. So there are loads of women that we can look at, and this is my point. It's that anything you can think of about modern society, it has some kind of, apart from perhaps computers, but it has a counterpart in the ancient world. So when we are thinking about our current society, why not go back further and understand why something has originated, how it's changed, and look at history in that kind of fashion? And so that's kind of, I think, what we're trying to get at with classics. There is so multifaceted. There's so much you can do with it. It's so wide that you will find relevance to you, and if you're a teacher, for your students, always.
And we've had some more comments come in. So somebody said it's a wonderful discussion. And Laura said that she spends a lot of time teaching roots of words in science and teaching etymology to students, which is obviously coming from also closing the vocabulary gap from Alex Quigley, who also mentioned it as well. And Alka says, we often hear how private schools have an unfair advantage, and that classics is something that is the preserve of the privileged. Why on earth wouldn't we want to readdress that balance?
Brilliant.
And that's an important a comment that she's made. I'm going to come over to Virendra, who's on the call. But Virendra, if there's an echo, I'm not going to take the call. Okay, so we're going to try it and see what happens. Hi, Virendra, how are you?
Yes, I'm fine. And I want to say about something which you are talking about a language, which is all about on extension, which is Sanskrit. We are not getting our attention on Sanskrit.
Yeah, this
is a very powerful language. Not only a language, but it is the language of material. It is language of everything.
Yes,
we can say, because NASA and and other big organization has revealed that the Sanskrit can be the Sanskrit can be more powerful than the other language, like other than the English and Latin.
Okay, thanks for that, Virendra. What do you think, Jasmine?
Yeah, thanks, Virendra. That's a really important point, and I'm really glad you've raised it, because as somebody that studied the entire ancient world, not just classics, although that is now where I've specialised, that the importance of Sanskrit is really key. Now, I think, classicists do talk about Sanskrit, and you're right, it being the mother language, the originator of a number of languages, including Latin and Greek. So I think I agree that it would be a wonderful thing for us to have on the curriculum. And I know that it has been previously. I think I think if I've got this right, I think a friend of mine, in fact, did A-level Sanskrit. It does exist. It's just not very commonplace. And I would agree that perhaps it's something that classicists can look at to incorporate Sanskrit into classical studies slightly a little bit more, certainly discuss it a little bit more. And I agree that it's useful. I think that one of the difficulties with Sanskrit is that it is quite a complicated language for people to understand. And so because when we're dealing with, especially Latin, we're dealing with our own alphabet, I think people find it a little bit more accessible. So I think I'm just thinking a little bit more about what we might do with, our Key Stage 2 pupils. So these are really good points, and certainly something that I hope that we can improve on that sort of provision for that language in schools.
Thank you for that call, Virendra.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
yes,
so
I want to add some points also.
yes.
In the Sanskrit, if you if you speak one word, then there is no substitute of that word in Sanskrit, because means that one word has one meaning in Sanskrit, which can be the very helpful for the programming, as Twitter's CEO has said that the Indian students should focus on Sanskrit language in coding. So I think we should do more for the Sanskrit and
Okay. Great, thanks,
yes.
Virendra. So basically, he's saying that Sanskrit has a lot of things that it goes into, and that maybe we should concentrate on bringing that in. Thank you very much for that call. Okay, Jasmine, why did teaching classics collapse in UK schools and universities? And I know it's making a comeback now, but why did that happen from the 70s? There was a kind of a collapse in UK schools and universities.
Yeah, I mean, this is again part of the sort of, if you like, the history of the subject of classics. So it used to be a requirement for a lot of top universities that their students had Latin and Greek in order to matriculate into the university. So that actually ended. And so when that ended, the need for Latin and Greek kind of just fell apart with it. We no longer needed it. And so it sort of slowly died away. So that's really the main reason. And then, in the late 80s, with the advent of the national curriculum, with a focus much more on core subjects, classical subjects were kind of ignored in that, and therefore schools started to focus on the national curriculum, and therefore a already very crowded curriculum already. So essentially it got pushed out really, and then what we're doing now is kind of trying to revamp that and reintroduce it.
Okay, great. So what does Classics for All do to help support schools? And can you give us the impact or a case study of a school, whether it's primary or secondary, of the kind of things that you've done?
Sure. So, what we do is, we encourage any teachers that are interested from primary or secondary to contact us. And then one of our network coordinators will work with that individual and that school, including, if you're in a maths or anything, we can work with those as well. And what we do is we train teachers specifically to deliver classical subjects as part of their curriculum. Now, this can be in a big way. So sometimes schools, especially primary schools, choose to take French off the curriculum and put, or their modern language, it often is French, and replace it with Latin, which is one of the routes that you can go down. So taking MFL off and doing AFL, Ancient Foreign Languages. And so our job will be to help support the teachers in doing that. So we provide, subject knowledge training, we provide resources, we provide help with, schemes of work and ongoing support. And I just want to add here, because I'm sure your listeners are thinking about this. So hang on a minute, I know nothing about this subject. So what am I supposed to do? So our courses are designed for the non-specialist. So you need no knowledge of classics whatsoever to deliver these lessons. They are fully resourced. There's even teacher scripts. And this is what I'm talking about for Key Stage 2 teachers here specifically. So or Key Stage 3, so you can have it in Key Stage 3 as well. So they span the two things. And if you're looking at kind of introducing at GCSE or A level, then we provide support there as well. So that's the main work we do. Rather than working with pupils, our kind of mantra is that we work with teachers to really establish the subject in a school. But you're not alone. You're with us and we help you. And I promise you, when you see what we've got, you will have the confidence to deliver these lessons and you will greatly enjoy it yourself.
And can you just go through those activities, just to clarify again, what kind of activities do you deliver to the teachers then?
Okay, so we do training for the teachers. So what we would do is, depending on the course that so essentially it's like a consultancy. So I would speak to a teacher, we'd work out kind of what their aims are, what they want to do. They would then choose a course or choose a combination of courses that they would deliver. So then I would physically train that person. So either on Zoom, we might have some sessions where I would Go through the lessons with them, make sure that they have their own subject knowledge. So in fact, you get to learn Latin yourself or classical subjects yourself, because we instill that in you. And then you go away and you teach the lessons, and then you have little bits of top-up training with us. Sometimes this is done in person, but obviously with COVID, that's not been happening. So that's the type of activity. So it's very much CPD kind of format. So it's going to feel like that. But I promise it's not boring. And I've just done a day with Princecroft Primary in Warman, so you can ask any of them. There were plenty of jokes and fun involved as well.
And we've just had a message come in saying that it's a great discussion, ladies. My 9-year-old was fortunate enough to join Jasmine's introduction to classics session during lockdown and has since wanted to learn more. Thanks, Jasmine, for the exposure, and hope I can see this rolled out in her school. And then Alison has also said, and we will try and get that to you, Alison, if we can provide links to the course and useful websites in the chat as well. Yeah. Jasmine, just to move on a bit, do you think that, you know, bringing classics back into schools will transform education?
I think that's quite a difficult and loaded comment, really. I mean, can anything really truly transform? Can one thing transform education? No, I don't think so. We need a holistic, wide approach to education, and that's kind of, I think, what I would say classics could bring. So it can't transform it, but can it enrich it? Can it improve it? Sure, absolutely. And that's really where I would put it. I think, as I hope made very clear to your listeners, that it's so wide a subject that in studying it you will develop such a wide range of skills as well as knowledge, that I can only see that would improve somebody's educational experience. I am talking about attainment and achievement here as well, of course, but I really want to focus on our students' experience of the subject and enjoyment of it, as opposed to just focusing solely on outcomes. I think that's where we sometimes go wrong in education.
Yeah, and we had a couple of comments, so I'm just going to go through these comments. Sure. So Twitter went a bit crazy over the weekend, and we had Pam Plummer comment in, and she said, as classics for all grow, classics in state schools, the need for bursaries to encourage those pupils to continue on to read classics is important. And she mentioned Mary Baird, and she said it was a generous offer from Mary Baird, but equally important that unless people see it leading to jobs, it's difficult to persuade students to study it. And another comment we had come in was from Noreen Hallid. She said, I think we need to put more effort into telling students, she agreed with you, that studying for the sake of studying or learning is a good thing. And her daughter knew she wanted to study medicine, but she still opted for classic civilization as one of her A-level subjects. And then we go on to Daniel Bundred, who I think is in the studio. And if you are, Daniel, please do call in. And I do believe that somebody else, Yamir Bade, who I'll come back to in a minute, is in the studio. And if you've got a moment, it would be good if you can call in as well. Daniel said that even when he was studying Latin as a boy, the argument that it helped in learning other languages seemed especially specious, as it does to some extent, but only if that's the end goal. It's far less efficient than studying the languages itself. And then Michael Salter said Latin helps a lot with Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and to some extent French. And it helps a lot with English vocabulary. But the whole logical thinking argument always struck him as a coded insult to teachers of other subjects. And it was unnecessary and elitist. And then Mr. Napthane said, and I'm going to quote him, he said that it's been said to improve cognitive processes, but in a facetious way, he also said someone once said it helps you think better. And then Daniel obviously went on to say that it is quite elitist. It's the class signifier. You can tell straight away what school the child is in. But he also did say that he would be impressed if it was in state schools, and that it was liberated from the field of arcane knowledge of our betters. So I'm just going to come back to a few of the comments. Now, obviously, Palm Plummer mentioned the information about students not picking the subjects because of the fact that it doesn't lead to the careers that they're supposed to, especially for low-income students. And Mary Baird herself, actually, and this is quite exciting for those of you who don't know, Mary Baird is a person who's a well-known classicist, and she messaged in and she said we can show excellent stats for employment of classics grads. And I guess someone has also said people do best when they do what they're interested in. And Alka's also just messaged in saying over 70% of graduate jobs do not specify a subject, so why not classics?
Yeah. I mean, is there a question in there, Sobia, or do you want me just to kind of?
Yeah, my question is, my question is, what would you say to people who think that this isn't a useful qualification for employability? That's my first question, and then I'll move on to a second question. And just to let you know, Jasmine, we think that Mary is actually listening live this morning as well.
Oh, good. Well, hello, Mary. Thank you for listening in, and I hope you approve of the comments I'm making. Yeah, no, of course. You know, I find this difficult because I to separate my own personal background. You know, I am this person that they say doesn't exist. I am the non-elite background. We went to the same school. I come from a single parent family, from a council estate. I shouldn't be doing this according to all of these views. You know, to me, it isn't elitist, and to a number of people, it isn't. But I do acknowledge that has that reputation, and some of that is a reality for sure. But in terms of, you know, what we think about, you know, people studying it and its regarding employability. Well, again, I know I keep talking about history, but we need to try and lump these together slightly because it's the same arguments. I mean, why do you study a degree in humanities? Why do you study a degree in languages? You might not go and be a linguist, a professional linguist. You might not go and be a professional historian. It's the skills. And I think one of the things that we perhaps haven't done well enough in classics is to allow the public to understand what skills you're going to learn from doing classics rather than just the subject content. So like we have talked about, you know, if you're being a historian and being a linguist and being an archaeologist, you can imagine the array of skills that you are going to gain from studying classical subjects. So, you know, I picked this degree and I had absolutely no clue what I was going to do with it. I just thought, well, I'm going to UCL, that's a decent university. Why I just followed my heart. So I just thought this is going to be interesting and cool, and that's fine for me. And I think, you know, and I'm from one of those lower socioeconomic backgrounds. You know, I'm one of those individuals. So I think we should encourage people to follow their interests, but also I understand that we live in a real world where employability is extremely important. So we need to understand better what these skills are and allow our students, our parents, our teachers to feel confident that a classical subject, a choice of a classical subject for a degree or an A-level is going to be beneficial to your child, to your student, in a wide variety of ways that aren't just subject knowledge based. And I think hopefully today that's a bit clearer.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I'm just going to move on a bit.
Sure.
We had a principal at Dubai College, Mike Lambert, tweet at me yesterday, and he has a student who's on the call now, and we're going to take his call very quickly.
Sure.
His student has written about the European appropriation of classics, which can make it seem like someone else's country, when in fact the cultural influence of classics extends as far as south and east as it does west. I'm going to ask Yamir, if you can hear me, Yamir. Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, I can hear you.
Thank you so much for calling in all the way from Dubai today.
Yeah, thank you. Wow.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Can you just explain what Mike Lambert meant by that comment about the European appropriation of classics, which make it seem like someone else's country? What does he mean by that?
Well, I think what he means is, I think appropriation might be a slightly strong word, because I do believe that Greco-Roman civilization is it is the bedrock and the cradle of modern European and Western civilization. But I think possibly to many students from non-European backgrounds, it can make classics seem, well, this sort of view of classics can make it seem almost irrelevant. And this is something I experienced living in Dubai, being a British Indian. I never really linked Latin and Greek to this idea of Europeanness. It's always been something very international to me. And that led me to become more interested in the Hellenistic world, so the Greek world after the death of Alexander the Great. And I found some really interesting examples of how universal classics was at that time. So, for example, I found an inscription by a poet called Sophitus at Kandahar in Afghanistan. And Sophitus is actually a corruption of an Indian name. And this is in the 1st century BC. And Sophitus has composed a poem that contains allusions to Homer and Callimachus. And I think that's such a good example of how 2,000 years ago, someone like Sophitis in Kandahar could find Homer and Callimachus and classical literature relevant to him. And I think that shows us that universality in classics isn't something new and something that is something that we should encourage as something that's never happened before, but really it's endemic and intrinsic to classics. So yes, classics is European, but it's always had an appeal to people outside of Europe, just as it should today.
Great, thanks for that, Yamir. What are your thoughts, Jasmine?
I mean, absolutely agree. I mean, it's a fantastic example. So thank you for highlighting that to people. You know, the classics are wide-reaching, as you quite correctly put. You know, the Alexander the Great's empire extended to as far as the Indus Valley. Culture is something I see as always, you know, it's always changing, always evolving, and classics is not, you know, that's what classics is. You know, these cultures connect with one another, they influence one another, they evolve, they change, they merge. I don't want to use that term melting pot, but it kind of is. It is a melting pot, and classics has been doing that all of these years. And also, we haven't really talked about the idea of classical reception, which is kind of, you know, how cultures after the period we're talking about have interacted with classics, and that's been ongoing. That happens today. It happens globally. And we're always engaging with it, and you know, we talked about it in a more traditional sense today, but it is always influencing, changing, evolving. And so, you know, it's great to hear that you're thinking about these things and studying it in Dubai with your own heritage. And thank you for highlighting that as well. And I hope you really enjoy the study of it and continue with it.
Thank you, both of you. Right, okay. We've had a comment come in from Navida. She said, thank you, Jasmine. I'm really enjoying your show. Thank you for enlightening me. I've learned so much this morning from you, and you've answered so many of my questions regarding Latin and classics. And she really wishes they taught Latin at her daughter's school. Just to finish off, Jasmine, I've got one more question.
Yeah.
Mary Beard is funding classics for underrepresented groups. What are your thoughts on this?
I think this is a great thing. I mean, you know, the Twitterati have perhaps had a problem with this. You know, it does happen that you could debate how useful something like this is. From my point of view, anything that is working towards a greater good is an excellent idea. I think it's wonderful that Mary has put her money into this and wants to use her profile to raise aspirations for these individuals, something that I might have benefited from and a number of students today would benefit from. It doesn't need to be an absolute answer to the concern, and I'm sure that's how Mary intends it. She does not intend it to be, oh, here we are, here's the result, here's the answer, I've solved it. It's supposed to start breaking down the barriers and encouraging debate and interest. And my God, has she done it? It was BBC front page news. So the more we talk about it, the better it is. And I applaud her for her efforts there.
Okay, and just to finish off, Jasmine, we've had Nigel Straker, who's our old maths teacher.
Mr. Straker, oh my God.
He's messaged in, and I just want to read this out to you.
Yeah.
Jasmine, thank you for the incredible work that you are doing. Congratulations also on your fantastic achievements since leaving school. I do agree with your view of the need to refresh and widen the current educational offer in order to make it more holistic and relevant. Sobia, thank you for hosting the discussion and enabling a range of critical issues such as social class, purpose of education, employability, academic study, and cognitive development to be aired. So we hope you're well, Mr. Straker. Thank you for listening and sending in a comment. That's been absolutely fantastic. Jasmine, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you today. We must stay in touch.
We must.
Thank you for such a great discussion.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And I'm really pleased that you've all managed to gain a bit of knowledge. Don't let it end here, though. Please, you know, engage with. I'm on Twitter, Jasmine Elmer, on Twitter. Please engage with me. If you want to talk about this further, don't just disappear. Use the websites. There's contact forms for Classics for All. Please just fill one in. We'll be with you. Encourage your students, your children to keep being classical in their minds. And thank you ever so much to everyone.
And Alison has just messaged in and saying, very inspiring, Jasmine, an excellent show. And Khalil said, great conversation. Awesome. Right. Okay. Thank you so much to everybody who's stayed listening in, and a huge thank you for Jasmine, and also to Yamir for calling in, and also for Virendra for calling in before as well. Right, next up we've got the news, and then we're going to come live to Abid Patel. Please do stay tuned.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your Teachers Talk Weekend News. Nicola Sturgeon has denied claims by opposition parties that this year's awarding of results will be a shambles, similar to complaints last year when thousands of pupils received lower grades than they were expecting. The First Minister insists that the 2021 results process is a world away from the situation in 2020, as this year results would be based on the judgment of teachers who looked at work pupils had done. She made it clear that no past results or algorithms will dictate what a learner's grade will be. Last year, the Scottish Government was forced to U-turn and upgrade the results of approximately 75,000 pupils. Schools across the UK are being encouraged to start a conversation on climate change ahead of the UK hosting a global climate change summit known as COP26 later this year. The Together for Our Planet Schools Pack was launched on Thursday, the 10th of June, and aims to encourage student climate change leaders to come forward to inspire others. Resources include a guide for running a green assembly, ideas to organise a walk to school week, and other resources provided by the likes of World Wildlife Foundation and TED Talks for Schools. As part of the launch, Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited a school in Cornwall, already playing its part in fighting against climate change. The Global Summit will be held in Glasgow this year between the 1st and the 12th of November. "150 academics at Oxford University are refusing to tutor students at Oriel College until the college removes the statue of a donor who they say glorifies colonialism. The statue of Cecil Rhodes, an Oxford student in the 1870s, stands on the college's building on Oxford High Street. Rhodes is described as an imperialist by many and played a dominant role in southern Africa in the late 19th century. An independent commission had previously ruled that the statue should be removed, but acknowledged the challenges in terms of planning permission and cost. To have the statue removed, permission would need to be sought by Community Secretary Robert Jenrick.
Right, thanks for that, Joe. Okay, moving on. Abid Patel is an IT director and Google certified educator and innovator and trainer. Abid is also the leader of the Google educator group GEG UK. He's a global leader and a passionate advocate for sustainable digital transformation in schools. Abid has been ill, so this is a shout out to Abid. We hope you get well soon. He's in the studio listening. Here's his thoughts. It's really interesting. Hi, Abid. Thanks for coming onto the show today.
Hi, Sobia. No, thank you for inviting me. Really great to be here.
Right, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Just coming off a nice long weekend and a bit of a restful break, and back into the swing of things.
That's great. Abid, for our listeners, can you just tell everyone what it is you do? What's your role, and where do you fit into the school environment?
So I'm the IT director of a multi-academy trust. It's called Leading Learning Trust, and we're a multi-academy trust of two primary schools in East London. I basically oversee everything IT related in the school. Primarily, my role is about digital transformation, and I'm driving the digital strategy across the trust as a whole. But I also oversee the IT service delivery, so I manage a team of technicians, and we manage I oversee the day-to-day break fix of the IT, but I also then support with the delivery and the embedding of EdTech across the entire school, and also liaise with teachers to help to embed EdTech into the curriculum as well.
So are you involved in the EdTech planning in terms of the vision and the long-term and short-term, medium and long-term strategy as well?
Yeah, both from a sort of curriculum perspective, but also from a behind the scenes perspective. Curriculum wise, I'll work with the heads of computing at both schools from a strategic delivery perspective as to how we deliver our services, our technical bits and pieces, managing contracts and that kind of stuff for the trust. I do all of that. I'm responsible for all of that stuff. But then I've started more and more deeper diving into embedding it into the teaching and learning as well.
So when you're talking about teaching and learning, you're already a Google certified educator. What aspects of delivery do you help teachers with?
So I will support with, from the Google side of things, I'll definitely support with supporting on the Google tools. I've delivered training for all of our staff on how to use the Google tools. We moved over to Google Workspace or Google Apps for Education, as it was then, even before G Suite for Education, back in 2016. And at that time, that was before I became a Google certified trainer. But at that time, I was then delivering training to all of our staff as to the new platform that we were moving to. So we had a very traditional platform as you do in most schools, and we moved back when sort of it wasn't really in fashion. Cloud technology wasn't really in fashion then, back in 2016, 2017, and we took a huge leap of faith to move over to the cloud and move away from having all of our documents and data on locally hosted servers. So obviously I was the key person in delivering the training to all of our staff across the two schools as to what is Google Drive, what is Google Docs, what is Google Sheets, Google Slides, what benefit does it bring, why are we doing this? So that's kind of where I started with my Google journey. And then obviously I worked my way up to Google Certified Educator, level 1 and 2. And then I actually applied for Innovator and was successful for Innovator, which is an amazing experience, absolutely life-changing.
Can you just explain what the Innovator program is for our listeners who don't know?
So yes, so once you've finished your educator level 2, you have the option. The most popular option I think everyone goes for is trainer, because trainer sort of you can apply for all year round. And so if you are basically proficient in the Google tools and you can and you deliver training, then you can apply for Google Certified Trainer, and the application cycles are on a monthly basis. With Innovator is very different from that perspective. Innovator is all about finding a challenge in education or a problem in education that you think needs a solution. And there might be a solution out there, there might not be a solution. And basically what Google want you to do is they want you to take that problem and work on that problem to sort of fix it effectively. And what the way the Innovator Academy works, or did work, because it's going through a bit of a change at the moment, but back when I did it in 2019, where there were several academies that were held around the world. And so in 2019, you had several English-speaking academies. You had one in Sydney, you had one in London, one in Singapore, one in New York, and then one in Sweden. And then there were some foreign language academies as well. I applied for the one in London, and so there's an application process where Google want you to apply for to this academy, and they want you to present what your problem is. The golden rule is you never talk about solution, because it's an academy that's based around design thinking, and so the solution you do once you're at the academy. But in the application process, you present your problem, you show why you're passionate about that problem, and you show why you want to find a solution to this, but not talk about it. And then what happens is if you're successful, you get chosen. And so at the time I was successful, and I got chosen as amongst one of 36 educators from around the world. And then we all went to Google for 3 days at the academy, and it was amazing. I still say to this day, it's the best PD experience I've ever had in my life, multiplied by a million. It's absolutely life changing. And you know, for all of the global connections that I have today, prior to Innovator, I had zero global connections. I didn't even know people outside of London in EdTech, or I knew a handful of people. Now I talk to people globally all day and all night long, and all of those connections have become a thing because of Innovator, and
that's fantastic.
It truly was life-changing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, you talked about this idea of you're doing design thinking rather than having a solution, which is interesting because Google obviously want to see the way that you think. Do you need to have a lot of IT experience to be able to be part of this program? Because there's loads of educators who want to be Google certified educators, which is fantastic. But do you need any extra IT skills to go onto this Innovator course to, go into it further?
Absolutely not. No. I mean, if anything, myself and a colleague of mine, Dave Leonard, who's also an IT director up in the Northwest, we were only two of the 36 who worked in IT. The rest were all class teachers across the board, so different subjects, and a range of IT skills. Yes, you need to be at least Google Certified Educator Level 2, so you need to have some proficiency of the Google Workspace tools. But after that, your problem could be about anything. So your problem doesn't have to be IT related. It has to be a problem in education. So I know a colleague of mine, his problem was about raising or promoting reading amongst the children with elderly groups, and there are so many other projects that have happened across the Innovator. There's only, I think, 2,200 innovators in the whole world.
Wow.
And across that entire cohort of innovators, there are a vast range of projects, and some of which don't touch IT in any way whatsoever. So no, absolutely not. It's all about having that passion for education, and having that passion to want to change education for the better, and bring new things and new solutions to education that will go on to help other educators.
And so in terms of delivering these training sessions to people in your school, to staff in your school, were they on board with EdTech and the changes that you were making? Did you experience any difficulties? What kind of things were interesting? What was that like?
Absolutely. I was all about change, and everyone I was trying to deliver change to was all absolutely averse to change. And totally, I was probably labeled as public enemy number one for a long time, because nobody likes change. And there's always this meme that I come back to where it's a comic strip that's in two halves. The top half will always say, the top half is a speaker in front of a crowd, and the speaker is saying, who wants change? And everyone in the crowd has their hands up. And the bottom half says, the speaker asks, who wants to change? And everyone puts their hands down. And I think that's something that, you know, it's human nature. You know, we don't like things to be different. We've become accustomed to the way things are. And I think teaching and education as a whole is, you know, it is very stressful. We all have lots of things on our plate at all times, and there's sort of very little respite. And some of these things that at that time we didn't really take for granted. You know, COVID has kind of changed the platform in the sense of we all understand IT a lot more and the importance of IT, and, you know, having these sort of connections, be it via Zoom or Google Meet or Teams or whatever out there, you know, not being able to see our families and not being able to see our friends and only having those connections through virtual means has made us a lot more conscious of the importance of IT. But back then, IT was like, you know, the electricity or gas. It was a case of, you know, it's just that thing. It costs us far too much money. It never works half the time. We don't understand it, but we kind of need it to get our job done, and that's it. And so, for all that I hate the IT, I have to use it, and I've only just got used to using it, and now you want to change it all, you know. And so it's sort of that aspect. And my job over the last few years has always been trying to help schools to understand that, you know, the IT is not like the electricity and gas. You know, you don't need a strategy for what gas provider you go with. You don't need a strategy for the electricity. You don't need a strategy for what you're going to do with it. It's just a line that comes in, you plug devices in, and things work. Or, you know, you turn the cooker on. With IT, it's not like that, because IT is changing every single day. IT is probably one of the fastest moving industries in the world. You know, what might have been a supercomputer yesterday could be, you know, absolutely useless in the next few months. And it's about understanding that one thing that I've always said in education is IT has been so held back in education because of external pressures like Ofsted and things like that. It's the one thing where, look, we need to worry less about that and worry more on, you know, passing exams, raising attainment, making sure that we're ready for Ofsted. And so that's where those kind of things get left behind. But I think there's a real understanding now, especially with budgets being cut more and more and more by central government. There's an understanding now that, you know, one of the things that cost us lots of money is IT. And so we need a strategy around it, that we have to understand the way the industry works. When you buy a piece of equipment, especially in the education sector, it comes with a 3-year warranty. After that 3 years, that is, you are then using that device at your own risk, and you need to then think about refreshing that device. And that's a very big pain point with schools, where we just spent, you know, 30 grand on all of these devices 3 years ago, and now you're telling me that in 3 years' time we might need to replace them again. And that's the way the cookie crumbles with IT, that the industry. That's the way things work from a consumer perspective. You know, you buy a new iPhone, you buy a new smartphone, it comes with a 1 or 2 year warranty, and they release a new one every single year. So it's about, you know, them having to have a return on their investment to make, and the consumer is expected to take that expense on if you want to use the latest and greatest. And that's where the IT comes in, and that's where the need for training comes in, is because, you know, teachers are very, very busy, and they have very, very, very full plates, and they live very stressful lives. You know, the one thing that is hard for educators as a whole is keeping on top of the ever growing changes, and that's where the trainers come in. It's our jobs to make sure that we can see all of these things that are coming. We can see all of these new features that are coming, whether they're good and they're going to bring lots more value, or whether they're going to be some challenging changes. We need to be on top of that, and we need to constantly be aware of what's potentially coming and what we need to do to help educators to be more prepared for the things that they do. So that's my experience with training.
And how can we encourage educators to keep up with those changes? Because one of the things that I find in education is exactly what you've said, that we've got lots of competing pressures on us. How can we continue with that professional development to make it easier for some staff? Because some staff really do dislike IT, and some staff don't want change. How do we get them involved in such a way that it doesn't become burdensome for them?
I think it's something that I've very recently come across, especially where I've been working with lots of teams behind the scenes. Teachers get a very heavy PD schedule throughout the year, and so we must deliver CPD on this and on that and those specific areas, and somewhere in between IT will sort of get filled in at some point. One area of schools where I've found doesn't get that sort of help is from the perspective of office staff, for example, and support staff. Some office staff, especially in schools, and I know in primary schools, some of them have been there for 20 years, and they've gone through typewriters to Microsoft Works to Microsoft Word, and maybe now Google Docs or Word Online. And so you then sit down and ask these people, what training have you had? And they're like, none of it. It was kind of thrown at the deep end, and make it work, sort of thing. And so doing the same thing with support staff, where as well, we're moving more and more things into online. We're moving more and more things into, we don't send messages, print out messages and put them in pigeonholes anymore. For example, we send everything electronically by email, and some of our staff don't even know how to check their email, because they've never had to, and it's not their job to. And so you can sit everyone into a session and say, right, today I'm going to talk about Gmail. So make sure you click on the waffle in the top corner and then click on Gmail, and you've lost them straight away, because they don't even know how to get to a web browser. They don't know how to switch the computer on. They don't even know what Gmail is. They know what email is, but they don't know that Gmail is a specific email client. And then you've suddenly lost those people. And one thing that I'm working on now is exactly what we do in the classroom, or the teachers do in the classroom, is differentiated learning, and making it very clear. And some of the lower ability groups of staff that I'm working with, who are completely alien to IT and fearful of it, because there's one thing that I always say is, believe it or not, there is no button on the keyboard that says self-destruct. There's nothing you can do will make the computer break unless you physically pick it up and chuck it. That's where I've learned. I always say that to this day, for 17 years that I've been working in this industry, I've never had a paid training course ever. Everything I've done has been sort of self-learning or free PD sort of thing. And I say I've learned by trial and error, and that's the way I start off, is don't be afraid. And then you also have to help to create a culture of trust, in the sense of, look, there is no question here that is silly. So if you honestly don't know how to turn the computer on, and don't be afraid to ask. If you don't ask, you're not going to learn, or it's going to be expected of you to know. And so break it down to the very, very, very simple things. And I think I've learned that through Twitter, where I keep up with the IT all day long, and I'm always rolling with things, but and I always read the news, and I'm seeing things. But even the simplest of shares, sharing these little snippets of, oh, did you know you could press Windows Shift and S to take a screenshot? And some of those tweets that I put out get the most likes, because it's like, wow, I didn't know that. And at first I used to think, but doesn't everyone know that? And you realize that no, everyone doesn't know that. It's because I'm sat there and I'm constantly, constantly taking in all of this knowledge because it's my job to do so, that I've begun to take it for granted. But I think, having those having those misconceptions that people will know everything or expect people to know. As soon as you expect that everyone is a beginner, or at some point everyone is a beginner, then I think you can take people along the journey with you, because then they feel comfortable and they feel that trust, and they say, right, you are helping us, as opposed to just thinking or making me look silly to say, no one's ever trained me on this, so how am I expected to know it? And you have to appreciate that there's a lot of that out there, because not everyone has had the opportunity to have that training or learn.
And that is an issue in terms of if you are trying to change the strategy in a school, or you're trying to develop staff's IT skills in a school. It is important for you to be able to differentiate for every staff member so that you're all in line and working together. And I think the best way to do that is to have your key influences, isn't it? Have some people who are really good at it and then help support the others to bring them alongside with you. Otherwise they just remain behind, don't they? Because they don't want to get involved and they don't want to show that they actually they don't understand what you're doing.
I think the power of peer support is amazing. Being able to have those champions in schools, and one of the things that I always say when schools are thinking of digital strategy or making sort of change management, shall we say, is find your digital champions, but then also find those not so digital champions. Find those people who are averse to IT, because one of the things that I find is, if you sit in a room full of digital champions, we all get it. And that's where we start to take things for granted, to say, well, we all know not to do these things, and so we're never going to see what's going to go wrong. But if you find those people who really struggle with the IT, or who claim not to see the benefit of the IT, and I grew up with blackboard and chalk and there was no problem, look, I turned out fine, sort of thing. And getting those people on board, you find there is so much to learn from them, because just even sitting down and saying, I'm here to support you, and I'm not here to judge you at all. Tell me how it is. If I ask you to do something with the IT, what are you going to do? And sometimes, they'll turn around and say, I'm going to panic, because first thing, I have no idea. Okay, right. So if I've asked you and say, I expect something, what are you going to do? And then you'll find that they might say, well, I might go to someone and say to them, if I do your duty next week, will you do this for me? And so that's great. It gets the thing done and stuff like that, but you've not sort of learned anything out of it. So it's like, right, okay, what's, then you can move on to another line of questioning and say, right, cool, no problem. What's the fear here? Why do you not feel comfortable to do this? Or why do you need to go ask someone to do it for you, as opposed to ask for help to learn how to do it? And I think that peer support is really, really helpful with that. But also that's another part of the Google the Google certifications now, the newest program, which is the Google Certified Coach program, which is effectively one-to-one coaching with other members of staff within your school. And I think it's a really, really important thing to think about from the perspective of just being able to help build others' confidence, but also helping you to then be able to take people along the journey with you as you move towards that new strategy.
And this is all fascinating for me, by the way, because obviously I'm into IT and tech as well. You've gone global. So can you just explain to our listeners what kind of things that you demonstrate, what kind of sessions you deliver, why is it important? What is it that Google is trying to do globally right now?
Going global has been something, don't get me wrong, I never imagined it. I never intended that, yeah, you know, I'm ready to go and take over the world, sort of thing, as much as I'd love to. I think Twitter has been a huge support for me, being able to go global, in inverted commas, shall we say. And it's all about the one thing that I talk about so much is the PLN, which if you look up in some education places, PLN, they might say professional learning network. Some places say personal learning network, and I prefer that definition to PLN, because it really is it's not a personal learning network, so to speak. Yes, you will learn, and you will learn a whole lot of things, but one thing you develop is really good friendships and relationships. I mean, my PLN is what supports me in my everyday things that I do, and likewise I support others within my PLN. Being able to turn to people and deliver things and help and support. And where I say Twitter has been a great thing, I mean, people always ask me, how did you get into Twitter, and how did you then end up where you are today, so to speak? And working in IT in education has always been a very lonely role. It's always been sort of a one man. It's always been a one man band sort of thing, where you know, you're the guy who's expected to make things work magically without any training, and you know, oh, don't worry, Abid will fix it, and that kind of stuff. And so it's always been a case of, you know, we're looking for like-minded individuals. We're looking for people who understand us and who get us, because all my career I've always reported to teachers, and teachers understand what other teachers do because that's their bread and butter. But as soon as I have to go in front of a head teacher and maybe the finance person and say, oh, by the way, we need to buy a new server because the old server is come to the end of its useful life, and we've run out of IP addresses, and Windows updates are not applying, and all of that, and suddenly you get so technical that you've lost them completely. And it's like, okay, just look, get to the chase. How much money are you asking for? 10 grand. You what? Like, what are you talking about? 10 grand? I don't even know what this 10 grand is for. And so it's always been a case of, I always wanted to find those other people who are doing the same things, who are having the same challenges. And then Twitter was the one place that I turned to and said, and I just started with simple tweets saying, you know, this is what I did today, and this is what I feel what benefit it's going to have to our staff and our students. And just one after the other, I started just celebrating every tiny little thing I did. And you know, going back to the, oh, by the way, did you know how to get an emoji keyboard? You press Windows and full stop and you got an emoji keyboard. And it's like just having those sort of wow light bulb moments with other people, and then other people start to connect with you, and then you start to share, and then you start to develop these groups, and then you celebrate that you just became a Google certified educator level 1, and then you did level 2, and then you go on to these bigger programs like trainer and innovator. And I think that's where and how I was able to sort of make those global connections, is just by sharing. And what I always say is, we do wonderful things in schools, but and our children do wonderful things, but what do? We then hang their work up on the wall, and no one outside of the building sees that work. And it's like, let's break down those 4 walls, and you know, showcase all of the amazing things that we're doing to the rest of the world.
And you know, I mean, I'm fascinated by this, because I do believe in breaking down those walls and barriers, and you know, working outside of the school walls, because that is important. We're living in a society now where things are changing. You know, we listen to CPD on the go, we listen to lots of different podcasts, we work in a different way, and so it's really important for our students to be working in that way as well. In terms of, I mean, what I find fascinating about you is that you're not just delivering to staff, you're actually doing the tech side of it as well. So you're also doing the admin. Can you just explain to network technicians what exactly are you doing with regards to that in terms of delivering CPD and how that's working globally?
Just in terms of experiences, really, from during the height of the pandemic, we myself and a few other educators from around the world, we founded the global Google Educator Group, Global GG, and it came out of a need and an understanding that we were all moving towards remote learning, and we were all delivering some form of training to our staff, where it's like, you know, how do we use Google Classroom? How do we set assignments through Google Classroom? How can we transition from in-person learning to remote learning through the forced need due to lockdowns? And we found that we were effectively replicating the same training in all of our sort of localities. And it's like, well, look, we're all doing everything via remote. We're all doing everything via you know, Zoom or Google Meet. So why don't we just, you know, would you like to come and deliver training to my staff? And so we started to share the same training sessions. So we started delivering each other's training sessions, and we started like, right, I've got to deliver this training session. Why don't we live stream it to YouTube, and we'll advertise it on Twitter and see who turns up? And next thing you know, you've got like 2,000 viewers live engaging in the chat, and you're like, wow. And so lots and lots of schools started to, you know, take up G Suite for Education, as it was then. And obviously part schools, you've got the IT teams who, you know, never heard of G Suite for Education before. And the one thing I think that was probably lacking was, how do you set up G Suite for Education? How do you manage the admin console, that kind of stuff? And that's one of the early sessions that we did in Global GG is how do we, you know, how do we do things from the technical side of things?
Yeah.
How do we get that sort of started? And that's where my Google Certified Innovator project came in as well, where I developed an event called It Just Works, and I hosted that event virtually in July of 2020, and it was just basically showcasing digital transformation in different schools around the world, and then also for, you know, open to everyone, not just teachers, but helping IT teams to understand the why, helping senior leaders to understand the why, helping educators to understand the why. And that's what we did. And I guess I was in a fortunate position where, as a technical person, as a techie person, through trade, I was able to sort of deliver those sessions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's how I got in touch with you, because I remember I was looking for someone to help me on the admin console, and I just tweeted on the Google Educators platform, and they put me in touch with you. So schools are obviously, because of remote learning, they've gone through this transition. And I guess there are people out there wondering what's different between Google and Microsoft, because clearly they're two different platforms, and they're wondering which one is the best one to go for. And I know you probably can't tell us because you're working for Google at the moment, but in terms of the similarities and differences, can you just highlight what those are for us? Are you able to do that?
Yeah. Disclaimer: I'm not working for Google, so
Okay.
I'm totally I'm totally able to share.
Okay,
And
brilliant.
no, but both platforms are great in what they provide. And you know, Google is a very, let's say, I say very new technology, and it still is a new way of working to a lot of people. We're probably very, in education, we're probably very used to a traditional Microsoft platform,
Yep.
which is on-premise with on-premise servers and on-premise PCs, and then doing things on Microsoft Windows with Microsoft Office, and then saving those files into a shared area amongst other people and that kind of stuff. And so there's that sort of traditional on-premise platform. And I think that platform is probably the one that is sort of effectively going away now, as much as possible, because there is now a huge understanding that we need to be able to have access to all of our important documents everywhere and anywhere at any time. And so the two major platforms out there, and there are others, but the two major ones seem to be Google Workspace for Education and then Microsoft 365. And they're sort of similar in the sense of what they do. You know, Google has the everything within the Chrome browser approach. So you've got Google Drive, and then you've got Google Sheets and Google Slides and Google Classroom to sort of manage it all. With Microsoft, you've got Microsoft Teams, and then you've got Word Online, Excel Online, PowerPoint Online, and it's sort of very familiar, really. And it probably comes down to personal preference. You know, what you like, what you think works for you. When we moved as a trust, when we moved to Google back in 2016, I looked at both platforms. I looked at Office 365 as it was back then, and Google Apps for Education. And I thought, at the time, I thought Office 365 will be the platform that is the least resistance, least change, shall we say. Whereas I didn't think Google Apps for Education was the way to go. But more and more of our schools around us were using the Google platform, and they were changing and moving towards that platform. And at the time, Office 365 wasn't as popular as it is today. And so that was really the decision that sort of swayed me to go towards Google, because it was a purely online approach that took us away from sort of on-premise and moved us into the cloud. And so that's probably one of the reasons why I took that. But it comes down to personal preference, really. It comes down to what you think works for you. Both platforms are really good. Both platforms have their advantages and, I won't say disadvantages, but probably features that are probably at the moment lacking. But the good thing about cloud platforms is they're developing all the time. So if Google Workspace has something that Microsoft 365 doesn't, then, you know, it will at some point be implemented. And likewise, if there's something that Microsoft 365 has that Google Workspace doesn't, vice versa. You know, there is development happening all the time, and it's very low impact to the end user, because if it's a new feature, then, you know, suddenly it's a new feature and it's just appeared just like that. So yeah, there are loads of other platforms out there. A lot of schools decide to go with the Apple platform, for example, using iPads with other third-party tools like Sobia and that kind of stuff. And that's another option that sort of works for many schools out there. So there are loads of different ways, but I think that's where it comes down to. And I think for me personally, the Google platform has probably been one that's worked for us and a very supportive community.
In terms of, because obviously budgets are a huge issue for schools, and making sure that we're procuring things in a way that is suited to our budgets, do you think that kind of has an impact on the decisions made in terms of which platforms to use?
I think so. Like, one advantage that I find with the Google platform is Chromebooks. Okay. And Chromebooks are very a much lower priced, low maintenance device, shall we say, that is very easy to use, easy to manage. There are loads of intangible benefits, not just from the budget side, but, you know, in terms of the amount of technical administration that schools need to do with Chromebooks, it's much lower than, say, for example, the on-premise Windows platform. But then likewise, you've got other devices as well, like the iPad, and the iPad is probably a bit more expensive, a bit more premium, but it has more mobile features, shall we say. It's more more friendlier from a mobility perspective. But then that depends on which way your school decides to go. I know there's a local school that's not too far from me that use iPads heavily for their remote learning and prior to remote learning, but their curriculum is more very creatively constructed, so it focuses much more on creation, which sort of boosts and exploits the potential of the iPad device, which is much more easier to sort of use from a creativity perspective. But then that's not to say you can't use a Chromebook, but then Chromebooks probably have an advantage more from, especially the Google Classroom perspective. It's a really nice, simple, easy to use platform that brings your classroom very together, but in an online experience.
Right. Sorry, Abid is very knowledgeable and there's lots that he can go into. And I just wanted to say thank you very much, Abid. He does have COVID right now, so I'm hoping that he gets better real soon. If anyone does want to get in touch with Abid, he is on Twitter, so you can tweet at him to find out more information as well. I'm afraid that's it for today. The excitement leading up to this has been great. I can't believe Mary Beard was listening in today and she's tweeted at us. Both my guests have been absolutely fabulous. Jasmine and Abid, you have both been so awesome. It's just been a pleasure to host today. Next up is Graham. Then we've got Khalil and we've got Fiona coming on. It's been another stellar Sunday. I'm so proud of my friend. You've all been wonderful. Take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.